I refused to give my $700,000 dream house to my brother, so my parents threatened to sue. My lawyer burst out laughing, and suddenly I felt powerful. What happened next ruined them completely. The phone speaker crackled with static. Then my father's voice cut through, sharp as broken glass. Trevor needs that house more than you do, Alicia. Sign it over by Friday, or we'll see you in court. His words landed heavy in the quiet room. But across the mahogany table, my attorney, Diane Walsh, suddenly burst into muffled laughter, her hand flying up to cover her smile. What was supposed to terrify me into surrender had somehow become the spark of something else entirely, the opening move in my freedom story, and the first crack in the foundation of their own destruction. Hi everyone, I'm Alicia. I'm 34 years old, and I've learned the hard way that sometimes the quietest way to win a war is simply to let your enemies pull the trigger first. If you've ever stood face to face with a family who believes you exist solely to serve their comfort, buckle in. Because today, justice isn't just coming, it's arriving frost-covered and grinning. Diane cleared her throat and leaned toward the speakerphone, her charcoal blazer crisp against her shoulders. Mr. Brennan, this is Diane Walsh, counsel for Alicia. I should inform you this call is being recorded, and we've documented your threat of litigation. On what grounds, exactly, do you plan to sue your own daughter for possession of a property she legally owns? Silence followed. The kind that crawls through a room, thick and suffocating. Then, right on cue, my mother Pamela's sharp voice pierced through, high and indignant. She knows what she owes us. We raised her, for God's sake. Before she could continue, Diane cut in, her tone smooth as silk stretched over steel. Raising a child is a duty, Mrs. Brennan, not a debt account. Please, by all means, proceed with your lawsuit. It's been far too long since I've had this much legal comedy in my week. The line went hot with my father's furious sputtering, before it finally clicked dead. The laughter vanished from Diane's face as she turned to me, her expression suddenly serious. They're going to regret this, Alicia, she said quietly. But you need to be ready for what comes next. I took a slow look around my living room, trying to anchor myself in reality. The exposed brick I had scrubbed clean by hand. The old hardwood floors now glowing like warm honey. The broad bay windows catching afternoon sunlight over the garden I'd coaxed from weeds and grey soil. This wasn't just a house. When I bought this 1920s Craftsman 5 years ago, it was written off as a lost cause, a ruin, something only a demolition crew could love. But I saw what it could become, just like I'd learned to see something in myself, even when my family only pointed out the cracks. To rebuild this place, I'd traded nearly everything. Every spare dollar. Every weekend. Every second of peace. I'd stripped wallpaper until my fingers bled. Learned plumbing and electrical work from endless nights watching tutorials until my eyes blurred. I'd spent holidays alone because family gatherings always turned into lectures about how I was throwing my life away on a broken house, while my brother Trevor needed help. Always Trevor. Forever the favorite. 3 colleges dropped out of. 2 cars wrecked. A mountain of loans vanished like smoke. And still, he was their bright star. The same brother who once laughed at my fixer-upper, until his friend, the realtor Bethany, casually mentioned that the neighborhood was suddenly high demand and property values had tripled. That's when everything changed. Overnight, my house stopped being Alicia's silly project and magically became family property. Suddenly, I was the selfish one, hoarding what they thought should have been shared. I've been training for this moment without knowing it, I told Diane, my voice steadier than my heartbeat. She smiled faintly and flipped open her laptop. Then let's sharpen our swords, shall we? The deed is solely in your name, correct? Yes, I said, pulling out my folders. Paid with my own savings. No co-signers. No family money whatsoever. I scrolled through my phone, showing her 5 years of progress photos, the cracked ceilings, the patchwork walls, the nights I slept under tarps, the polished glow of the final result. I turned a $140,000 wreck into a $700,000 home. All by myself. Diane's eyes glimmered with something sharp and knowing. And your parents' contribution? That question hit like a punch I should have seen coming. Their contribution, I said softly, was calling me insane. My mom told me I'd die alone in a rotting money pit. My dad offered to help find me a nice apartment instead. Perfect, Diane murmured, typing quickly. Now, about that trust fund issue you mentioned. Ah, yes. The secret that had kept me sleepless for weeks. The quiet heart of all this rot. I pulled out a worn folder, edges soft from being handled too often. My grandmother, Ruth, my father's mother, had left trust funds for both Trevor and me. Equal shares. We were supposed to access them at 25, but I never saw mine. I was told that Grandma changed her mind before she died. That she'd been disappointed in me and cut me from her will. I remember the shame like it was fresh. How I'd sat in my Honda Civic crying in a parking lot, convinced I really had failed everyone I loved. That I deserved nothing. Then last month, at Trevor's engagement party, with his dazzling fiancée Natalie on his arm and a glass of champagne in his hand, everything cracked wide open. Drunk and bragging, Trevor laughed about how he'd already burned through his trust fund, and how he'd need my house to keep Natalie living the high life she expected. I'd laughed back, brittle and confused. Trust fund? What trust fund? He'd smirked, voice slurred with condescension. The same one you got, stupid. Then, after a pause, he did that cruel little laugh I'd heard all my life. Oh, wait. Mom and Dad said you blew yours fixing up that dump. Guess that's why you're so bitter. Diane stopped typing mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing dangerously. He said you got your trust fund. That's what made me start digging, I said. I hired a private investigator, Felix. He found Grandma's real will. My hands trembled as I passed her the papers. Trevor and I each inherited $200,000, distributed when I turned 25. But I never saw a cent. The paper crackled in the sudden quiet. My parents listed themselves as trustees, I continued. They handled the payout, and paid themselves. They told me I'd been disinherited while stealing the money meant for me. All to prop up Trevor's lifestyle. The joking light was gone from Diane's eyes now. Her gaze hardened, cool and certain. Her face was stone. This is fraud. Criminal fraud. And now they're threatening to sue you for a house you bought with your own money, while they stole your inheritance. That's not even the best part, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Felix found more. My parents have been claiming me as a dependent on their taxes for the past 5 years, while I was fully employed and supporting myself. They've been collecting credits and deductions using my information. Tax fraud on top of inheritance theft. Diane shook her head slowly. They really thought you'd never find out. They thought I was the same scared kid who believed them when they said I was worthless. The same daughter who accepted crumbs and called it love. The truth was, I might have stayed that person if they hadn't gotten greedy. If they'd been satisfied with stealing my inheritance, I'd have never known. But threatening to sue me for my house, my blood, sweat, and tears house, had triggered something primal in me. So, Diane said, closing her laptop with a decisive click. Here's what we are going to do. We are going to let them file their frivolous lawsuit. In discovery, we'll request financial records that will expose everything. Then we'll countersue for the stolen trust fund, file criminal complaints for fraud, and report the tax situation to the IRS. What about Trevor? I asked. He didn't know about the theft, did he? Ignorance isn't innocence, Diane said firmly. He benefited from stolen money and participated in trying to take your house. He's an adult who makes choices. And days later, my parents made good on their threat. I was served at work, in front of colleagues, because of course they wanted to humiliate me. My hand shook as I signed for the papers, feeling the curious stares of co-workers burning into my back. The lawsuit claimed I had promised the house to Trevor, that I was holding family property hostage, and it sought immediate transfer of the deed. That night, I sat in my kitchen, the kitchen I'd renovated myself, where I'd cried over burned spaghetti while learning to cook alone, and read every word. Each lie felt like a slap. They painted me as a vindictive daughter withholding rightful family assets. As someone who'd made promises I'd never made. Diane's response was swift and brutal. Our countersuit laid out everything. The stolen inheritance. The tax fraud. The attempt to steal property purchased with legitimate funds. We didn't just defend, we declared war. The family group chat exploded within hours. My phone buzzed incessantly. Aunt Lorraine, Alicia, How could you sue your own parents? Uncle Frank, this is disgusting. Family doesn't do this. Cousin Brianna, always knew you were selfish. My chest tightened with each message. These people had watched me struggle, had seen my parents' treatment of me, and still, they defended the lie. I typed one response. They stole $200,000 from me. The evidence is filed with the court. Look it up. Then I left the chat, my hand shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. The real showdown came at what would be our last family dinner, 2 weeks after the lawsuits were filed. My mother had summoned everyone to their house, the house I now realized my inheritance had probably helped pay for. The irony wasn't lost on me. I arrived with Diane and Felix, my investigator. The dining room was packed with relatives, all ready to stage an intervention. My parents sat at the head of the table like martyred saints. Pamela's eyes already red-rimmed with tears. Alicia's here, someone whispered, and the room fell silent. The hostility was palpable. I could feel it pressing against my skin like humidity before a storm. You came, my mother said, tears already starting. I knew you still had some family loyalty left. I came to give you one chance, I said, not sitting down. My voice carried further than I expected in the hushed room. Drop the lawsuit. Return my inheritance with interest. And amend your fraudulent tax returns. Do it within 48 hours, and I'll consider not pressing criminal charges. How dare you? My father started, his face flushing crimson. How dare I? I laughed, but it was sharp, bitter. Discover you stole my inheritance? Find out you've been committing tax fraud? Refuse to hand over my house to your deadbeat son? Trevor stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I'm not a deadbeat. I need that house. Why? I asked, my voice cutting through the tension. Because you burned through $200,000 plus whatever mom and dad stole from me? Because your fiancé thinks you're rich and you can't admit you're broke? Natalie went pale. What? Trevor, what is she talking about? Felix stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the table. Financial records, he said simply. Mr. and Mrs. Brennan received $200,000 from Ruth Brennan's trust intended for Alicia. The money was dispersed over 5 years into various accounts, including several in Trevor's name. The room erupted. Relatives grabbed for the papers, voices rising in shock and anger. But not at my parents, at me. You ungrateful, family business should stay, how could you embarrass? Enough. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You want to talk about family? Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't threaten to sue for property they have no right to. My voice rose with each word, years of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. You all sat here ready to guilt me into giving up my house. But where were you when they stole my inheritance? Where were you when they told me I was disinherited and worthless? Silence. The only sound was Natalie quietly crying. That's what I thought. I looked at my parents. Really looked at them. My mother's tears had stopped, replaced by cold calculation. My father's righteous anger had morphed into naked fear. You have 48 hours, I said. Drop the lawsuit. Return the money. Or face the consequences. We don't have it, my mother whispered. The money. It's gone. Then you'd better find it, Diane said, her voice like ice. Sell assets. Take out loans. Figure it out. Because the alternative is federal prison for tax fraud and state prison for inheritance theft. We left them there, surrounded by relatives who were slowly realizing they'd been defending criminals. Natalie broke up with Trevor that night. She sent me a message that made my chest tight with vindication. Thank you for exposing the truth. He told me his trust fund was in property investments. I almost married a fraud. My parents dropped their lawsuit within 24 hours. They hired their own lawyer who tried to negotiate, but Diane was a shark who smelled blood. We accepted a payment plan for the inheritance plus interest, required them to file amended tax returns, and got a legal agreement that they would never contact me again. The IRS penalties alone nearly bankrupted them. They had to sell their house, the one partially paid for with my money. Trevor moved back in with them, his engagement ruined, his reputation destroyed. The golden child, tarnished beyond repair. But the sweetest justice came 6 months later. I was sitting in my garden, the one they'd mocked, when a certified letter arrived. It was from my grandmother's estate lawyer, Lawrence Quinn, who'd been tracking me down after seeing the lawsuit in public records. My grandmother had left me something else. Something my parents couldn't touch. Her personal journals and a small separate account they'd never known about. In her journal, dated a month before she died, she'd written, "I fear that my son and his wife will try to keep Alicia from her inheritance. They've always resented her independence, her strength. If you're reading this, dear one, know that I saw who you really were. The house you'll build with your own hands will be worth more than any money I could leave you. But take what's yours and build your life free from their shadow." She'd known. Somehow, she'd known. The small account had grown over the years to nearly $50,000. I used it to pay off the last of my renovation loans and install the greenhouse I'd always dreamed of. Every morning now, I wake up in the bedroom I restored myself. Sunlight streams through windows I scraped and painted. I make coffee in the kitchen I rebuilt from studs and dreams. My house stands now as more than just property. It's proof that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep. That sometimes their rejection is just redirection towards something better. The relatives who sided with my parents faded away. Good riddance to bad blood. But others reached out. Cousins who'd been pushed away, aunts who'd been labeled difficult for asking questions. I built new relationships on foundations of truth instead of obligation. Trevor still sends occasional messages begging for help. I don't respond. My parents live in a small apartment now, their golden years tarnished by their own greed. They thought they could sue me into submission. Thought the threat of legal action would make me crumble like I had as a child. Instead, their threat became my liberation. Diane was right to laugh. It was laughable, the idea that the people who'd stolen from me could use the law as a weapon. The law became my sword instead, cutting through years of lies to reveal the truth beneath. I've learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you the villain, no matter how many people try to cast you in that role. That documentation is more powerful than manipulation. That the truth, when finally spoken, has a weight that no amount of tears or guilt can outweigh. I've also learned that renovation isn't just about houses. It's about lives. About stripping away the rot to find the solid structure underneath. About taking something everyone else has given up on and seeing its potential. I did that with this house. And somewhere along the way, I did it with myself too. The garden has become my sanctuary. I planted roses where weeds once choked the soil, deep red ones that bloom even in the rain. I built a stone path that winds through lavender and jasmine. On warm evenings, I sit on the porch I rebuilt and watch the sunset paint my house in shades of amber and gold. This is the life they said I'd never have. The home they said I'd never deserve. The peace they tried to steal. Word spread through the extended family about what really happened. The carefully crafted narrative my parents had built for decades crumbled under the weight of court documents and bank statements. Relatives who'd once sided against me started reaching out with quiet apologies. "We didn't know," they'd say. But I'd learned that willful ignorance is still a choice. Some relationships I chose to rebuild. My cousin Juliet, who'd been the black sheep for marrying outside our cultural expectations, became one of my closest friends. We bonded over wine in my renovated kitchen, laughing about how being disowned was the best thing that ever happened to us. "They do us a favor," she said once, "when they show us who they really are." But I also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Some bridges are meant to burn. The relatives who demanded I drop the charges for the sake of family unity never understood that there was no family to unify. Just a hierarchy that required my silence and submission to function. I chose myself instead. Trevor's downfall was swift and public. Natalie didn't just leave quietly, she told everyone why. His social circle, built on the illusion of wealth and success, evaporated overnight. The friends who'd partied on his money disappeared when the well ran dry. He tried to get jobs, but his reputation preceded him. The guy who tried to steal his sister's house isn't a great reference. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved 3 states away, trying to start over. Part of me felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy, but recognition. We'd both been victims of our parents' greed, just in different ways. They'd made him believe the world owed him everything and taught him nothing about earning it. But he'd also made his own choices. And when given the opportunity to side with truth or theft, he'd chosen theft. My mother attempted to reach out once, violating the no-contact agreement. A handwritten letter arrived, full of the same manipulative language I'd heard my entire life. "I'm your mother. We only wanted what was best. You've broken this family." I read it once, felt the old familiar pull to make peace, to smooth things over, to shrink myself. Then I filed it with my attorney as evidence of violation. The legal system sent them a reminder. They didn't contact me again. My name is Alicia Brennan, and I own my house free and clear. Not just the deed, but every brick, every board, every flower in the garden. I built it with hands they called worthless. With money they said I didn't deserve. With dreams they tried to steal. And when they threatened to take it all away, I didn't just keep my house, I brought theirs down around them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well. It's living honestly, with nothing left to hide and nothing left to fear. I've hosted Thanksgiving dinner in my home for the past 2 years. Not for my parents or Trevor, but for the chosen family I've built, friends who stood by me, cousins who reached out, and Diane, who's become more than my attorney. We laugh loud enough to rattle the windows I installed myself. We make toasts to truth and freedom and second chances. Last month, I started teaching workshops at the community center, home renovation for beginners. I show people, mostly women, how to use power tools and read blueprints. How to see potential in broken things. How to build something beautiful with their own hands. One student, a woman named Colette leaving an abusive marriage, cried when she successfully installed her first light fixture. "I didn't know I could do this," she said. "Now you do," I told her. The house has been featured in a local magazine, From Ruins to Renaissance, one woman's 5-year transformation. They wanted to interview my family about supporting my vision. I laughed and told them there was no family support. Just me, my stubbornness, and a whole lot of YouTube tutorials. The article ran with that truth, and I got messages from dozens of women with similar stories. Women who'd been told they couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't. Women who did it anyway. I've learned that healing isn't linear. Some days I still feel the phantom weight of their expectations, the ghost of who they wanted me to be. But those days are fewer now. I've built something they can never touch, not just a house, but a life. A self. A future that belongs only to me. When people ask if I regret fighting back, if I wish I'd just given them the house to keep the peace, I bring them to my front porch. I show them the address plaque I installed, the number painted in gold. "This is mine," I tell them. Every square inch. Every moment of peace. Every sunrise through windows I restored. And that's worth more than their approval ever was. The grandmother I barely remember, the one whose journals sit on my refinished bookshelf, was right. The house I built with my own hands is worth more than any inheritance. But getting back what was stolen? That was worth something too. Not just the money, but the proof that I deserved it. That I was worth fighting for, even if I had to be the one doing the fighting. If this story resonated with you, know that you're not alone. If you're living in the ruins of what someone else said you should be, start building. Start small. A wall, a room, a boundary. But start. Because sometimes the only way out is through. Sometimes you have to let them threaten, let them sue, let them show their true colors in the harsh light of day. And sometimes, when your enemies pull the trigger thinking they've won, you realize they've just handed you exactly the weapon you needed. Justice might be slow, but it's always worth the wait. And home, real home, isn't where your family is. It's where you're free to be yourself, completely and without apology. I found mine in the house everyone said I'd never fix. In the life everyone said I'd never build. And I'm never giving it up again.